Spirituality is all about being with things as they are. It taps into a way of being in the moment that was once our default state, but is now in danger of disappearing from the face of the earth. Spirituality is the only human endeavor designed to do this. So, what is spirituality? Spirituality is a big, tricky topic. In one sense, it's referring to the context within which everything exists. This is why spiritual texts are quick to point out that if you can talk about it, it isn't the Tao, it isn't spiritual. You can't point at context, or the undifferentiated field out of which everything emerges. Now, some people are adamant that spirit is an actual thing, an incredibly subtle field of formlessness out of which form, or the universe, emerges. I won't make any objective claims like that, but subjectively speaking, in a first-person sense, that is what happens. 1 minute, we're just minding our own business, open, awake, fully immersed in the undifferentiated moment. But then, in the next minute, when we turn and focus on something, that object emerges from the formlessness. Imagine you're walking along a river through a valley. The weather is perfect and you feel energized and content. No hunger, thirst, loneliness, worry, or distraction. Feeling fully awake and alive, you wouldn't change a thing. Now, imagine you come across a patch of strawberries, and they're just too ripe and inviting to pass by, so you bend down and pick some. In a real sense, when you turn your attention towards the strawberries, a different mode of being is activated, and the self comes online. Who we are as an individual, what we like, what we want is carried out in that kind of local subject-object interaction. A moment before, just being there was enough. The river, sky, and sunshine were all you needed. Your awareness filled the canyon without preference. But now that your attention has been captured by the strawberries, the self has stepped forward. You like strawberries. I'm not making a judgment here, by the way, just making a distinction between what we might call being versus doing. Spirituality is all about being with things as they are. This is our least complex and most natural state. Undifferentiated awareness is just open and awake. It's awareness prior to any needs or desires. But when you select something out of the big picture context and turn your attention to it, this is what we might call selfing. You're fulfilling some need. You're doing something. It's not morally right or wrong. It's just a different orientation towards the moment than simply being. Okay, so you're done filling up your bag with strawberries, but within the next few feet, you find a field full of flowers to pick. Then a grove of sugar maples to tap for maple syrup. There's satellite radio in the car and emails to return at home, and on and on. This is how life unfolds in the modern world. One opportunity or distraction after another. We didn't evolve as a species in an environment quite like this. And although living in a land of plenty may seem like a trivial issue, it's not. Our experiences dictate who we are, and in many ways, we have become egoic terminators, doing machines. Spirituality is all about the preservation of the non-egoic perspective. Through specific practices, spirituality suspends all the activity long enough for us to take a look around with our head up. It taps into a way of being in the moment that was once our default state, but is now in danger of disappearing from the face of the earth. The pre-modern world, the quote-unquote earth that was a quieter place. And although we had to be more vigilant because we weren't surrounded by walls and ceilings, we were actually much more deeply connected to the environment, to that big contextual, universal field we've been talking about. And as a result, we were less anxious, more mature and dignified. There was more being going on and a lot less doing. So there was a balance between local desire and the universal truth. This balance has slowly been eroded in the modern world. Spiritual practices simulate the quiet and stillness that were once a normal part of life. We need spirituality because after our walk in the valley, for example, it might be years before we return to that perspective of openness and acceptance. This situation is kind of a slow-motion tragedy unfolding outside of conventional awareness. Because the world around us is so overflowing with things, and we are so outwardly focused on them, we don't talk about the internal landscape or the mechanics of how all this changes us inside. Paul Bloom, a well-known psychology professor from Yale, says that even psychology is pre-Copernican. Copernicus was the first to basically prove that the Earth revolves around the sun. Now, this statement is pertinent because spirituality shows us that we do not revolve around the self, the egoic terminator, in the way that we think. There is more going on inside of us than we know. Paul Bloom also said that nothing he knew as a psychology professor helped him raise his kids. That's how mysterious and uncharted the internal landscape really is. Its exploration is the next great frontier. And knowing oneself deeply is extremely important to anyone interested in real change, caring for others, being truly intelligent and wise, living a full life without fear, and on and on. Everything we think and care about is suspended within a larger context, subjectively speaking. You and I can read the same book, the exact same words, but the experience will be different for each of us based on the context of who we are and what we bring to it. All of our experiences, our genetic history, our temperament, combine to create the third dimension that must be added to those words to bring them to life. The third dimension is the deeper, in-the-moment, experiential part of the iceberg of consciousness, but it is hidden beneath the waves. We think all the action is taking place in conventional consciousness, in the self. But every thought and impulse that arrives there is generated in the depths below. Spirituality listens to that voice, the deeper voice, which is more important than we know. Returning to our walk along the river, consciousness is designed to give us access to both the local and explicit experience of the strawberries and the universal and implicit experience of the valley. It should be easy to see that the strawberries emerge from and are supported by the context of the valley that surrounds them. That makes sense. But in the modern world and in the view of the self, this simple truth has been inverted. For example, we live within a matrix of infrastructure, walls, ceilings, systems, roads, that feels completely separate from the environment that supports it and from the universe that surrounds it. But of course it's not. And we live within the matrix of our own mind, which also feels completely separate from the other systems within us that support it. I'm going to argue on this channel that the problems of the world almost always revolve around this inability to see both the larger context and the limits of our local perspective. When mammals like whales and dolphins returned to the ocean after living on land, they developed sonar so they could quote-unquote see underwater. They were accustomed to seeing all the way to the horizon on land, but this is not possible underwater. Seeing more than a few feet is difficult in most aquatic environments, despite the documentaries that handpick locations and conditions. Another way of looking at spirituality is that it solves a similar problem for humanity. As a species, we are also in the middle of a transition from one environment to another. We used to be just another animal in nature, and now we live in the matrix. And now that we have moved indoors, and our sensorium has been reduced to the height and width of the walls, floors, and ceilings that surround us, we also need to evolve a new way of seeing. This is why the spiritual perspective is so indispensable. We desperately need to see beyond the toys, trinkets, and gadgets, beyond our own attractions and aversions, beyond the orthodoxy of our tribe, and on and on. The local subject-object perspective is what creates the problem. Every moment has been reduced to what we see, what we want, what we have. The Buddha's story 2,500 years ago begins with him leaving the luxurious apartments, the matrix he lived in his whole life. His family protected him from any contact with suffering, old age, or death. But after seeing reality for the first time, he dealt with the fear and confusion it caused, not by retreating back into a life of luxury, the life most of us dream of, which was an option for him, but rather he sat naked in the middle of it. There is a place within us to stand where we are courageous because we live in the moment. There, future pain is diluted and overwhelmed mathematically by all the moments of no pain. Eventually, the Buddha was able to see that our resistance to things as they are is responsible for much more suffering than aging, illness, and all the other downsides of living. The more we resist, the more we use metacognition to escape the moment, the more we abstract and shrink from what is, the more we suffer. Like children fighting against the medicine that will make them feel better, we have to stop resisting what is best for us. Our karma is made up of all the unresolved issues, conditioned patterns, and energy of our childhood. What we do now as adults, especially in our relationships, is energized by the momentum of our earliest experiences. We were introduced to the world through our caregivers, and how we learn to get their attention then is how we attempt to get the world's attention now. We learn to charm, to dissociate, to demand, or to hide our face. But we are adults now. We can be mighty and courageous in ways we never imagined, but not in the service of those limited deficiency needs from childhood. Spirituality teaches us to step out of the matrix of self, to be liberated from all our defenses, from the need to be right, from the narcissism of small differences with regard to our ideology, our way of being spiritual even. Spirituality is the only human endeavor designed to do this. As children, we need the huge umbrella of love and attention that our caregivers provide in order for us to begin exploring the world without fear. Another consequence of the modern world is that even infants have to compete for attention with the world, with Twitter, with all the strawberries that need to be picked. The self is built upon the anxiety that comes from feeling alone and the alienation of having to do everything oneself. So more than ever, modern adults long for that sustained connection to something greater than oneself. This is why spirituality often includes some concept of God. It's easier to let go and trust under God's umbrella. But we can also be that context for ourselves. We can trust, let go, and flourish under the umbrella of our own sustained awareness. This is the way love really works. It is not a subject-object transaction. It's an environment, a context in which everyone is free to be their authentic self. Full acceptance is true intimacy. This is all we are ever really asking from our loved ones. But paradoxically, the experience of acceptance all by itself, with only the universe around us to hear it, is all we really need. Love as a state of openness and acceptance is nirvana, and it's there for everyone. To wrap this up, let me say that we have to accept the world as it is now in order to know it. Everyone is too busy trying to change the world, but actions before acceptance is backwards. It is always filled with the self, with our own maps and models, with our own healing fantasies. The one thing we tend to agree on is how messed up the world and other people are. It seems rational to reject all of it. But if we do, we will keep making the mistake of evangelizing, which both secular and religious people do, based on our limited perspective, our attractions, aversions, and attachments. We have to open up like the Buddha and stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds in order to see the world clearly and to know what to do. Only those who have elevated their consciousness beyond the self, only people who know themselves deeply, who are aware of their wounds and blind spots, who know that no individual has the full picture and all the other things a spiritual path can make clear, are in a position to ponder the path from game A to game B. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of how to do that in the next video, but I can't thank you enough for your time and for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe.
You know, there are these monks all over the place saying, who are you? Why do you get to have this power? There's a lot of pain in that. This is John from Spirituality in Game V. I enjoyed speaking with you. Make sure you subscribe. smash or twist or bounce on that like button, hit the notification bell, and thank you so much.